In the winter of 1847, the town of Ashford, Massachusetts was covered in heavy snow when a young woman was found wandering near the edge of the forest. She had no coat, no shoes, and no clear memory of how she arrived there. Her name, she whispered, was Latoya. Witnesses said she walked as if guided by something unseen. Her lips moved constantly, repeating the same sentence. "He is still here." The townspeople brought her to Blessed Mercy Infirmary, a large stone building operated by the church. The infirmary had stood for decades, its tall windows overlooking frozen fields and silent grave markers behind the chapel. It was known for discipline, prayer, and strict medical care. When Latoya was admitted, doctors believed she was suffering from shock or trauma. She had no visible injuries, yet her pulse raced unnaturally fast. Her eyes darted toward empty corners of the room, as if tracking movement that no one else could see. Father Benjamin Crowe, the senior priest at the infirmary, insisted on personally observing her case. He believed the mind and spirit were deeply connected. If her illness was not physical, perhaps it was spiritual. The first night passed quietly, but at exactly 3:17 a.m., a nurse on duty reported something unusual. Latoya sat upright in her bed without warning. Her body moved stiffly, almost mechanically. She stared toward the darkest corner of her room and began whispering in a voice too low to understand. When the nurse approached, Latoya's head turned slowly, not toward the nurse, but toward the ceiling, as if following something walking above her. There were no rooms above. The following morning, Latoya remembered nothing. Over the next 3 nights, the same pattern repeated. At 3:17 a.m. she would rise, she would stare, she would whisper. On the 4th night, the whispering became clearer. "He stands behind you," she said softly. The nurse turned immediately. There was no one there. Yet the air in the room felt suddenly colder, and the candle beside the bed flickered violently before extinguishing itself. Doctors increased her supervision. 2 nurses now remained outside her door each night. Father Crowe began nightly prayers inside her room. Still, something in the infirmary had changed. Footsteps were heard in empty hallways. Doors were found slightly open, though locked before, and Latoya's eyes seemed to grow darker each evening. By the 2nd week of Latoya's stay at Blessed Mercy Infirmary, the atmosphere inside the stone building had grown tense. Nurses spoke in hushed tones. Even the most skeptical doctors began double-checking door locks before leaving their offices at night. Latoya's condition was no longer simple distress. On the 8th night, when the clock struck 3:17 a.m., the 2 nurses stationed outside her room heard a sharp scraping sound from within. It was not whispering this time. It sounded like something dragging slowly across wood. They exchanged nervous glances before unlocking the door. Latoya was not in her bed. She was standing against the far wall, her back turned, her fingers moving rhythmically across the surface. In the dim candlelight, the nurses saw dark lines covering the plaster. She was drawing. When they rushed forward and turned her around, charcoal dust covered her fingertips. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Without blinking, she said, "He doesn't like when you interrupt." The wall behind her was covered in symbols, crude circles intersected by vertical lines, shapes resembling doors, and repeated markings that looked disturbingly like tally marks. The doctors dismissed it as manic behavior, until the scratches appeared. Deep red marks formed along her forearms and shoulders. Not random, not scattered. They were parallel, almost measured, as if made by careful hands. But Latoya had been under observation. No sharp objects were found in her room. When questioned, she calmly responded, "They are reminders." "Reminders of what?" Father Crowe asked. She smiled faintly. "Of the ones beneath." That answer disturbed him more than the markings. Later that week, an older groundskeeper approached Father Crowe privately. He revealed something he had overheard years earlier, that before the infirmary was built, the land had been used during a cholera outbreak. Bodies had been buried quickly, without ceremony. Mass graves, unmarked and forgotten. Father Crowe ordered old property records examined. The rumors were true. Dozens had been buried on that land. That same night, Latoya began speaking again at 3:17 a.m., but this time her voice changed. It grew deeper, steadier. The nurses swore it did not sound like her. She spoke in Latin, fluently. None of the staff had ever taught her such language. Father Crowe listened carefully, his face draining of color as he translated. She says the ground was never blessed. The candle flames in the hallway flickered violently, and somewhere beneath the infirmary, something felt disturbed. The Latin did not stop the next night. At 3:17 a.m., the entire east wing of Blessed Mercy Infirmary seemed to hold its breath. Father Crowe stood inside Latoya's room with a worn Bible in his hands, 2 doctors behind him, and a nurse near the door clutching a rosary so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Latoya sat upright before the clock even finished striking the minute. Her head tilted slowly toward Father Crowe. Then she began to speak. The Latin was clearer now, slower, intentional. Father Crowe translated under his breath, each word making his expression darker. He says the earth was opened without prayer. A sudden thud echoed beneath the floorboards. Not from the hallway, not from the walls, from below. Everyone in the room froze. The infirmary had no basement under that wing, at least none on the official blueprints. Yet the sound came again, a dull, heavy knock, as if something had shifted beneath stone. One of the doctors rushed to the hallway, checking for fallen equipment. Nothing had moved. The floors were solid. The corridor was empty. Inside the room, Latoya's eyes rolled upward until only the whites were visible. "He remembers the fire," she whispered. "What fire?" Father Crowe demanded. But she did not answer him. Instead, her arm lifted slowly, pointing toward the chapel side of the building. That same morning, workers were sent to examine the foundations. While inspecting a cracked stone panel near the back of the infirmary, they discovered something unsettling. A sealed entrance. Old wooden boards reinforced with iron nails, hidden behind newer stonework. The wood was rotted, ancient. No records mentioned such a passage. Against Father Crowe's better judgment, the boards were removed. Behind them was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that escaped was stale and damp, carrying a scent that no one could immediately identify. Not rot, not mold, but something older. Lanterns were lit. 3 men descended. Below the infirmary, they discovered a long corridor of packed earth and stone. Along the walls were small alcoves carved crudely into the dirt. Inside each alcove, bones, stacked carefully, dozens of them, some wrapped in cloth remnants, some bearing small wooden crosses. The cholera graves had not been outside the building. They had been directly beneath it. When Father Crowe was informed, he felt the weight of something far heavier than illness. Above them, in a room, Latoya began laughing. Soft at first, then louder, and for the first time since her arrival, it did not sound human. The laughter echoed through the corridor like it had found new life in the walls themselves. Father Crowe rushed back upstairs, his heart pounding harder with each step. When he reached Latoya's room, the door was already open. The nurse assigned to guard her stood frozen in the hallway, unable to speak. Inside, every candle had gone out. The air felt suffocating. Latoya stood in the center of the room, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. Her head tilted slightly to one side. Her hair hung loosely around her face, casting shadows across her eyes. "You opened it," she said calmly. Father Crowe felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Opened what?" "The place where they were left without prayer." Her voice shifted mid-sentence, not louder, not deeper, but layered, as if another tone moved beneath her own. Downstairs, the men exploring the hidden corridor reported something disturbing. The bones in several alcoves had been arranged deliberately, not randomly stacked, but positioned, hands folded, skulls turned forward, facing the staircase, as if waiting. One worker claimed he heard breathing in the darkness beyond the lantern light. Another swore something brushed against his shoulder, though no one stood beside him. They did not stay long. When they returned upstairs, pale and shaken, Latoya began describing the tunnel in detail. The number of steps, the curve in the corridor, the alcoves carved unevenly into the soil. She had never left her room, yet she described everything perfectly. Father Crowe ordered the staircase sealed immediately, but sealing wood and stone did not quiet the unrest. That night, 3:17 a.m. arrived like a curse. This time, the knocking did not come from below. It came from the walls, slow, deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The pattern repeated across the east wing, traveling room to room like something moving inside the structure itself. Patients began screaming. Nurses fled their posts. One doctor collapsed from panic. And in the center of it all, Latoya sat quietly on her bed, smiling faintly. "They are counting," she whispered. "Counting what?" Father Crowe demanded. She turned her head slowly toward him. How many were forgotten? Then the infirmary lights, every lantern, every candle, extinguished at once. The building fell into complete darkness, and somewhere beneath the sealed staircase, something began to climb. Darkness swallowed the east wing for nearly 30 seconds. In that brief stretch of black silence, no one moved, no one breathed. The knocking stopped, replaced by something worse. Dragging, a slow scraping movement traveling upward through the walls, as if fingernails were pulling against stone. When the lanterns were relit, several patients were no longer in their beds. Doors remained locked from the outside. Windows were sealed, yet 3 rooms stood empty. Panic spread through Blessed Mercy Infirmary. Doctors searched every corridor. Nurses called out the missing names. The chapel bells were rung in alarm, echoing across the frozen grounds. They found the first patient near the staircase that had been sealed earlier that day. He was sitting on the floor, staring at the wall. His expression was blank, his breathing shallow. When Father Crowe knelt before him and asked what he had seen, the man whispered, "They were cold." "Who was cold?" "The ones under the floor." Before he could say more, his body went limp. He was still alive, but he would never speak again. The second patient was discovered in the chapel, kneeling in front of the altar. His hands were pressed against the stone as though trying to warm them. His fingertips were bleeding. Carved into the altar's wooden base were the same symbols Latoya had drawn on her wall. The third patient was never found. By sunrise, the staff was exhausted and terrified. Several demanded immediate resignation. One nurse packed her belongings and left without notice. Father Crowe ordered Latoya restrained for observation. When they secured her wrists gently to the bedposts, she did not resist. She only asked one question. "Why are you afraid of what you buried?" That afternoon, a faint tremor shook the infirmary. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. The sealed staircase cracked slightly along its edges. Workers refused to approach it. And at exactly 3:17 a.m. that night, Latoya did not sit up. She lay perfectly still, eyes closed, smiling. But from beneath the floorboards, the knocking returned. Not 3 times, not slow, but continuous, relentless, as if many hands were now striking from below, trying to be heard, trying to be remembered, and perhaps trying to come back. By the 6th night after the staircase had been sealed, Blessed Mercy Infirmary no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt occupied. The knocking beneath the floor had continued without rhythm, sometimes faint, sometimes violent enough to rattle the wooden bed frames. Staff members refused to walk alone. 2 priests now remained awake through the night, reciting prayers in the chapel until their voices grew hoarse. Latoya had not spoken since the tremor. She lay still for hours at a time, breathing softly, her restraints loose but untouched. Doctors noted her pulse was steady, her temperature normal. Yet the air around her bed felt noticeably colder. On the 7th night, something changed. At 3:17 a.m., instead of rising suddenly, Latoya opened her eyes slowly. The knocking stopped. Complete silence followed. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the infirmary, came a sound none of them had heard before. Crying, not loud, not human, but layered, as though dozens of faint voices were mourning at once. Father Crowe felt his resolve breaking. He ordered the staircase reopened. Despite protests, workers pried away the cracked boards. The passage exhaled the same stale air, thicker now, heavier. This time, Father Crowe descended himself. Lantern in hand, Bible pressed to his chest, he moved down the narrow steps into the corridor of bones. But something was different. The alcoves were no longer orderly. Several skulls had fallen forward onto the dirt floor. And at the far end of the tunnel, where darkness swallowed the lantern light, the earth looked freshly disturbed. As if something had pushed outward from within, he stepped closer. The soil shifted slightly under his boot, and then he saw it. Finger marks, pressed from the inside of the earth, as though hands had clawed upward from burial. Suddenly the crying stopped. Above him in her room, Latoya began speaking again. Not Latin this time, English, clear and steady. "They do not want vengeance," she said softly. "They want names." The lantern in Father Crowe's hand flickered violently, and for the first time he understood. The dead were not trying to escape. They were trying to be acknowledged. Forgotten souls buried without prayer, without record, without memory, and the longer they remained unnamed, the louder they would become. Father Crowe returned from the tunnel pale and shaken, dirt still clinging to his hands. By morning, he had made a decision that would divide the infirmary. The records would be opened. Old parish books were brought down from locked cabinets. Baptism lists, death logs, cholera reports from decades earlier. Pages brittle with age were carefully turned under candlelight as priests searched for every name connected to the forgotten outbreak. Latoya watched silently as the work began. For the first time since her arrival, she appeared calm. That night, instead of restraints, Father Crowe placed a small wooden cross in her hands. At 3:17 a.m. she sat upright once more, but there was no whispering, no Latin, no laughter, only stillness. In the corridor below, the knocking did not return. The next day, the priest descended again into the hidden passage. One by one, they carried small wooden markers into the tunnel. Each bone-filled alcove would no longer remain anonymous. Names were spoken aloud as they were written. Prayers were offered for every soul discovered in the old records. Some names matched. Many did not. The cholera outbreak had taken more lives than the parish had ever documented. It took 3 days to mark every resting place. On the final evening, Father Crowe himself stood at the end of the corridor where the disturbed soil had been found. He knelt, placed his hand against the earth, and recited the last prayer. Above him, Latoya lay quietly in her bed. When the clock reached 3:17 a.m. that night, nothing happened. No knocking, no cold air, no voices. For the first time in weeks, the infirmary slept undisturbed. In the morning, Latoya asked for water. Her voice was her own again. She remembered wandering in the snow. She remembered feeling watched. But she remembered nothing of Latin, of tunnels, or of the words she had spoken. Within days, her strength returned. Within weeks, she was discharged. Blessed Mercy Infirmary would never publicly acknowledge what had happened beneath its floors. Officially, the case was documented as severe trauma-induced psychosis. But privately, Father Crowe wrote a single sentence in his journal. They were never angry. They were only unheard, and after the names were spoken, the silence remained. Latoya left Ashford in early spring. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. She did not look back at Blessed Mercy Infirmary as the carriage carried her down the narrow road. According to Father Crowe's final report, she was restored in body and spirit. But peace inside the infirmary did not mean the story ended. Though the knocking never returned, subtle changes lingered within the stone walls. Staff members spoke of a lighter atmosphere in the east wing, as if pressure had lifted. Patients no longer complained of cold drafts near the chapel. Candles burned steadily through the night. The hidden corridor beneath the building was permanently sealed again, this time not out of fear but out of respect. A small wooden plaque was quietly placed in the chapel garden, listing the names recovered from the old parish books. No explanation was given to the public. Over the years, Blessed Mercy Infirmary continued operating. New doctors arrived. New priests took vows. Most never learned what had happened in 1847. Father Crowe, however, never forgot. In his later journal entries, he described one detail he never shared aloud. On the final night, after the last prayer was spoken in the tunnel, he had felt something brush past him in the darkness. Not threatening, not violent, but gentle, like a passing breath. He wrote that it felt like gratitude. Latoya's name never appeared again in church records after her departure. No marriage certificate, no burial notice in Ashford. It was as if she had simply returned to wherever she had come from. Yet locals would sometimes say that on very quiet winter nights, if the wind struck the infirmary at just the right angle, a faint whisper could be heard near the chapel garden. Not a warning, not a cry, but a single word carried softly on the air. Remember. And as long as the names remained spoken, the silence beneath the stone endured. Decades passed, and Blessed Mercy Infirmary became a quiet relic of the past. Many of the original staff had long since passed, and the younger generation of doctors and priests knew only of its reputation as a strict, orderly institution. Few ever questioned the lingering stories about 1847, dismissing them as exaggerated tales meant to frighten new employees. Yet, even in the daytime, the infirmary retained a certain unease. The east wing, where Latoya had been confined, felt colder than the rest of the building. Occasionally, staff reported flickering candle flames or the sensation of being watched. Nothing could be verified, and yet the stories persisted. Father Crowe's journal, kept carefully in a locked drawer, detailed the entire incident with meticulous notes and sketches. Symbols, names, Latin phrases, and detailed floor plans of the hidden tunnel were recorded. He wrote often of the sensation of being observed, of hands brushing past him, and of whispers he could barely understand. He insisted the spirits were not vengeful, merely unheard. The tunnel itself was eventually covered with layers of stone and earth, leaving no visible trace. Yet small, unexplained disturbances continued to appear. Footprints and dust where none should be, slight scratches on walls, and candles that seemed to extinguish themselves. Employees who stayed overnight reported faint whispering or the feeling of someone standing just behind them, though no one was there. Local historians occasionally visited, hoping to verify the old legends. Some claimed to hear strange echoes or observe shadowy figures beyond the windows. Others took photographs in the East Wing, only to find their images slightly distorted, figures blurred or partially missing, despite no one being present. Latoya's fate remained largely unknown. Records after her departure were non-existent. Some speculated she had returned to her family, while others believed she had disappeared entirely into the shadows of history, perhaps leaving town for good. Those who claimed to have seen her in later years described her as serene, pale, and quiet, never speaking of her time at Blessed Mercy. And still, on rare winter nights, the East Wing seemed alive with the memory of 1847. Candlelight flickers, shadows move, and the faintest whisper, sometimes one word, remember, drifts through the hallways, ensuring that the events and the forgotten souls beneath the stone remain a haunting legacy. By the early 1900s, Blessed Mercy Infirmary had changed hands several times. New doctors and priests came and went, unaware of the chilling events that had transpired decades earlier. The building itself, though sturdy, began to show signs of age. Cracks in the walls, creaking floorboards, and drafty hallways. Yet the East Wing, where Latoya had been confined, retained an inexplicable coldness. Visitors occasionally reported strange occurrences. Candles would extinguish spontaneously, whispers would echo down empty hallways, and shadows seemed to flicker just beyond their vision. Some claimed that objects would shift slightly, small chairs overturned, or books misplaced, though no one could account for it. Father Crowe's journal remained locked in the rectory. Only a few trusted members of the church knew of its existence. The details within were chilling. The hidden corridor beneath the infirmary, the alcoves filled with bones, the Latin chants, the nightly disturbances, and most importantly, Latoya's role as the conduit between the living and the forgotten. Over time, the story of Latoya and Blessed Mercy Infirmary passed into legend. The official records listed nothing unusual, merely noting her recovery and discharge. But locals whispered of the girl who had spoken in Latin, who had seen what lay beneath the infirmary, and who had returned only because the dead demanded to be remembered. Even today, the East Wing remains sealed to the public. Those who dare approach the infirmary after dark report hearing faint knocks from beneath the floorboards and a single whispered word carried on the wind: remember. Some say Latoya's presence lingers, watching, ensuring that the forgotten souls beneath the infirmary are never left unheard again. The story of Blessed Mercy Infirmary and the girl named Latoya endures, a haunting reminder that some darkness, some forgotten lives, and some secrets are never truly gone. And that history, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of resurfacing, demanding attention, and reminding the living of those who were once unheard. As the decades turned into the mid-20th century, Blessed Mercy Infirmary slowly fell into disrepair. New medical facilities were built elsewhere, and the old stone building was used less frequently. Staff who had never heard the story of Latoya occasionally reported odd occurrences: cold drafts in empty rooms, flickering candlelight in the East Wing, and faint footsteps echoing in hallways long after everyone had gone home. Local children dared each other to peek through the broken windows, claiming to see ghostly figures in Victorian dresses moving silently inside. Farmers walking past the infirmary swore they heard whispers carried on the winter wind. The legend of Latoya and the hidden corridor became a whispered tale, told to scare newcomers, yet grounded in the truths that had been documented in Father Crowe's secret journal. The rectory kept the journal safe, but over time, many clergy who had witnessed or recorded the events passed away. The younger generation had little knowledge of the dark history, and the East Wing remained sealed, a silent monument to what had happened decades before. The hidden alcoves and bones beneath the infirmary were never disturbed again, though some insisted the ground shifted as if restless. By this time, Latoya's life after leaving Ashford was entirely a mystery. Some said she had moved to another town, living quietly under another name. Others whispered she had left the country, never to be seen again. Those who claimed to have seen her in later years described a serene, almost ethereal woman, pale and quiet, never speaking of the horrors she had witnessed. And yet the building itself seemed alive with memory. Even in daylight, the East Wing felt heavier, colder. Candle flames seemed to flicker without cause, and shadows lingered longer than natural. Locals maintained their caution, warning visitors not to approach, for the whispers of the forgotten could still be felt, gentle, mournful, yet impossible to ignore. Some nights, a soft single word would ride the wind, carried from within the old walls. Remember. By the late 20th century, Blessed Mercy Infirmary stood largely abandoned. Windows were shattered, ivy crept up the stone walls, and the East Wing remained permanently sealed. Locals avoided the building, claiming that even in daylight, the cold air from that section was unnatural. Those brave enough to enter reported faint whispers, sudden drafts, and the feeling of being observed. Father Crowe's journal, preserved carefully by the church, had long since become a legend among historians and paranormal investigators. Its pages detailed the hidden corridor, the mass graves, and the events surrounding Latoya, including her inexplicable knowledge of the tunnels, the nightly disturbances, and the spirits that had demanded recognition. Despite the passage of decades, the impact of Latoya's presence lingered. The infirmary staff, even long after the building's decline, spoke quietly of strange experiences, shadows moving against the candlelight, footprints appearing on dusty floors, and the sense of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Some believed that Latoya herself had become a guardian of the East Wing, neither entirely alive nor entirely departed, ensuring the forgotten souls beneath were never left unheard again. Those who dared approach at night occasionally reported hearing a voice, faint yet firm, carrying a single word: remember. The story had grown into legend, a tale whispered to children and newcomers. Yet for those who had studied Father Crowe's journal or visited the infirmary, it was undeniable. The events of 1847 had left a permanent mark, not just on the building, but on the very ground beneath it. History had a way of persisting, and in the case of Blessed Mercy Infirmary, the past had refused to stay silent. Even today, Blessed Mercy Infirmary's ruins hold a quiet menace. Nature has claimed much of the structure, ivy twisting through broken windows, stone crumbling under decades of frost and rain. Yet the East Wing remains oddly intact, as if preserved by unseen hands. Locals avoid it, sharing whispered warnings about cold drafts, flickering shadows, and the faintest whispers carried on the wind. Investigators who dared enter reported chilling experiences. Faint knocks beneath the floors, the sensation of being followed, and, in some cases, shadowy figures glimpsed in the corners of their eyes. No one could fully explain it, and no one dared spend the night inside. The story of Latoya, the hidden corridor, and the forgotten souls beneath the infirmary had become inseparable from the building itself. Father Crowe's journal, now rarely seen, remained a silent testament to what had occurred. Every detail, the Latin chants, the hidden tunnels, the alcoves of bones, and the final prayers spoken, was recorded meticulously. Yet even he admitted that not everything could be explained. Some forces, he noted, simply existed beyond comprehension. And so the legacy endured. Latoya's brief presence, the forgotten dead beneath the infirmary, and the nightly disturbances became more than history. They became legend. A reminder that some events cannot be erased, some voices cannot be silenced, and some names demand to be remembered. Visitors report that on very still nights, if the wind strikes the East Wing at just the right angle, one word floats softly through the air: remember. And in that whisper, The spirits of Blessed Mercy Infirmary, the forgotten, the unseen, and the unheard, continue to endure, waiting for those who might finally listen. Though decades have passed since Latoya's ordeal, Blessed Mercy Infirmary continues to cast its shadow over Ashford. The once bustling stone building now stands mostly abandoned, but the east wing, where the hidden corridor and the mass graves lay, still radiates an unnatural cold. Visitors often report a sense of being watched, shadows that move independently of light, and faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. Locals share hushed tales of the girl who spoke in Latin, who knew what lay beneath the infirmary without ever leaving her room, and who disappeared into history after ensuring the forgotten souls were remembered. Scholars, paranormal investigators, and curious trespassers have explored the ruins, but the East Wing remains a place few dare to enter. Unexplained phenomena persist: flickering candlelight, objects moving slightly on their own, and occasionally, that single whispered word that has haunted generations. Remember. Father Crowe's journal survives as a silent witness, detailing the events of 1847 in meticulous, chilling clarity. The hidden tunnels, the bone-filled alcoves, the nightly disturbances, and Latoya's role as a bridge between the living and the dead are all recorded. Yet he admits there are mysteries even he could not explain. The story of Blessed Mercy Infirmary and Latoya endures as a testament to forgotten lives, the persistence of memory and the power of names. Even as time erodes the building and the people who lived through it fade from memory, the spirits beneath the stone and the girl who gave them voice remain. For those who pass by on quiet winter nights, the faintest whisper still drifts on the wind. Remember. And with that word, the past refuses to be silent, demanding acknowledgement from the living. By the dawn of the 21st century, Blessed Mercy Infirmary had become a relic of a forgotten era. Its stone walls, scarred by time and weather, seemed to hold memories within them. Ivy crept through broken windows, and the east wing remained sealed, a silent guardian of the secrets buried beneath. Though abandoned, the building continued to inspire stories, research, and fear. Historians pored over Father Crowe's journal, finding accounts of hidden tunnels, mass graves, Latin chants, and the eerie presence of Latoya. Paranormal investigators entered the site, reporting shadows that shifted without source, doors that creaked open on their own, and faint whispers carried on the wind. Always one word, repeated softly: remember. Latoya's fate remained a mystery. No records indicated her life beyond Ashford. No family traced her steps. Some believed she had left the country. Others whispered that she had merged with the spiritual realm she had once served, her presence still safeguarding the forgotten beneath the infirmary. Her brief time in 1847 left an indelible mark, not only on the building, but on the collective memory of the town. Even now, the East Wing carries a presence that cannot be ignored. Visitors sense cold drafts, fleeting shadows, and subtle disturbances. The story of Blessed Mercy Infirmary and Latoya reminds all who hear it. Some histories cannot be erased, some voices demand to be remembered, and some souls once unheard will make themselves known. Even across centuries, the warning persists in the air, soft yet insistent. Remember. Time marched forward, but the legacy of Blessed Mercy Infirmary and Latoya endured. The once active infirmary had long ceased operations, yet the East Wing, where the hidden tunnels and the mass graves lay, remained a place of quiet dread. Even in daylight, visitors reported an unnatural chill, shadows that lingered longer than they should, and faint whispers echoing through empty halls. The local population avoided the building, passing down stories of the girl who had bridged the gap between the living and the dead. Father Crowe's journal, preserved in secrecy, continued to bear witness to the events of 1847. It detailed the hidden corridor, the alcoves of bones, the Latin phrases Latoya had spoken, and the nightly disturbances that terrorized the infirmary staff. Yet despite the meticulous records, some aspects remained unexplainable. The presence of unseen forces, the inexplicable knowledge Latoya had displayed, and the persistent whispers from beneath the stone floors. Paranormal investigators and historians who dared explore the ruins described the same phenomena: soft knocks, flickering lights, sudden cold spots, and at times, the faint whisper of one word: Remember. Latoya's fate remained unknown. Some claimed she had disappeared entirely, while others whispered she had become a guardian of the East Wing, ensuring the forgotten souls beneath the infirmary were never silenced again. To this day, the story of Blessed Mercy Infirmary and Latoya serves as a haunting reminder. Some histories cannot be buried, some voices cannot be ignored, and some names demand acknowledgement. The spirits beneath the stone endure, and on quiet winter nights, their whispers persist, urging the living to heed their memory and never forget. Remember, in the end, Blessed Mercy Infirmary did not collapse in fire or scandal. It simply faded, stone by stone, year by year, into the background of history. Yet fading is not the same as disappearing. The East Wing still stands, weathered, cracked, silent, and beneath it, sealed by layers of earth and stone, rest the bones that once demanded to be heard. Modern surveys conducted around the property detected unusual temperature drops near the chapel garden. Equipment would occasionally malfunction without explanation. Audio recordings taken inside the structure captured faint distortions, low murmurs too fragmented to translate. Skeptics called it structural decay. Believers called it memory. But those who studied Father Crowe's final entries noticed something unsettling. In his last recorded page, written years after Latoya had left Ashford, he described a dream. He stood again in the hidden corridor. The alcoves were empty. The bones were gone. And at the end of the tunnel stood a young woman in the dim lantern light. Not frightened, not possessed, simply watching. When he asked her who she was, she answered softly, "I was only the voice." He awoke before dawn, the sensation of cold fingers brushing past his hand. No further disturbances were recorded after his passing. The whispers grew rare. The knocking ceased entirely. And yet, on certain winter nights, when the wind strikes the East Wing just right, the silence feels deliberate, as though something is still listening. Not angry, not restless, but aware. Blessed Mercy Infirmary remains a ruin now, visited only by the curious and the brave. Most leave with stories of unease, of shadows that move too slowly, of air that feels heavier near the chapel garden. But if you stand still long enough, if you listen closely enough, you might hear it. Not a cry, not a warning, just a single word carried through time. Remember. Years turned into centuries, and the ruins of Blessed Mercy Infirmary became little more than a forgotten landmark on the edge of Ashford. Nature swallowed the stone walls inch by inch. Grass grew over pathways once walked by priests and nurses. The chapel roof finally collapsed, exposing the sky to what had once been a place of prayer. But the East Wing remained. Even as other sections crumbled, that portion resisted decay in a way no one could explain. Surveyors noted the stone there seemed less weathered, the foundation beneath it strangely intact. Beneath that foundation lay the sealed corridor, and beneath that corridor, memory. Local legends evolved. Some said Latoya had never been possessed, that she had simply been sensitive to something older than the building itself. Others believed she had been chosen, a bridge between forgotten souls and the living world. Occasionally, historians attempted small excavations around the outer garden, searching for confirmation of the 1847 cholera burials. Every effort was halted by sudden equipment failures, minor collapses, or inexplicable unease among workers. Nothing dramatic, just enough to stop them, as if the ground preferred to remain undisturbed. The whispers, once frequent, became rare, but more distinct. Audio enthusiasts who recorded near the East Wing sometimes captured a faint layered sound. Not threatening, not sorrowful, grateful. One final detail, discovered long after Father Crowe's death, added a quiet weight to the legend. In the church registry, tucked between faded pages, was a single, loose slip of paper in unfamiliar handwriting. It contained only a list of names not recorded anywhere else. At the bottom, written clearly, "They are remembered." No signature, no date. Some believe Latoya returned once, silently, to ensure the promise was kept. And so the story closes not with terror, but with stillness. The infirmary stands in ruin. The tunnel sleeps beneath stone. The names were spoken. And the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was peace. Long after the last stone of Blessed Mercy Infirmary began to crumble, the land itself remained unchanged. Travelers passing the outskirts of Ashford often slowed near the overgrown path that once led to the chapel garden. There was no signboard now, no warning. Only a stretch of uneven ground where frost seemed to linger longer than anywhere else. Archaeologists eventually classified the ruins as historically unstable and sealed the property from public entry. Officially, it was nothing more than a 19th-century medical structure lost to time. Unofficially, it was something else. In the final archived notes connected to the site, investigators documented an unusual pattern. Birds avoided landing on the east wing. Snow melted slower there in winter, yet in summer the grass above that section grew thicker, greener, balanced, as if the ground had settled into quiet acceptance. No further disturbances were recorded, no knocks beneath the soil, no whispers captured on modern equipment. But those who stood near the chapel garden during still winter nights described something subtle. Not a sound exactly, but a presence. Not heavy, not oppressive. Aware. The legend of Latoya softened over the years. She was no longer remembered as a possessed girl or a mystery. Instead, she became a symbol. The one who listened when no one else would. The one who gave voice to those buried without ceremony. And perhaps that was all she had ever been meant to do. Because some stories are not about fear. They are about recognition. The bones beneath the stone were never moved again. No excavation disturbed them. No construction replaced the ruins. The land remained undisturbed. The names were spoken. The prayers were given. And the silence that followed endured. Not as emptiness, but as completion. If you walk there today, you will hear nothing unusual. No knocks. No cries. No whispers. Only wind through tall grass and the distant rustle of trees. But sometimes, in the quietest moment between breaths, you may feel it. Not a haunting, not a warning. Just the faintest reminder that the past does not vanish when it is buried. It waits to be remembered. And once remembered, it rests. And now, before you close this story, listen carefully. Because what happened at Blessed Mercy Infirmary was never just about ghosts. It was about silence. In 1847, beneath cold stone floors and holy walls, dozens were buried without names. No prayers, no records, no memory. And when the living forgot them, the dead refused to forget themselves. Latoya was never the darkness. She was the reminder. A single human voice strong enough to carry what the earth had been holding for years. The knocks were not threats. They were questions. Do you remember us? And when the names were finally spoken, when the prayers were whispered into the soil, the disturbances stopped. Not because something was defeated, but because something was acknowledged. History teaches us a dangerous lesson. It is not hatred that haunts places. It is neglect, forgotten names, unmarked graves, unfinished prayers. Even today, the ruins of Blessed Mercy Infirmary stand quietly beneath winter skies. No screams, no shadows chasing visitors, just wind and stillness. But if you ever find yourself standing somewhere old, somewhere heavy with silence, ask yourself one question. What happened here that no one talks about anymore? Because sometimes, the most terrifying things are not monsters. They are memories buried without dignity. This was not a story about possession. It was a story about remembrance. And now that you know it, the question is no longer whether the dead are at peace. The question is, will we remember?